What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. Raees Mohamed here from RM Warner Law. We're going to do another coffee and conversation starting later than usual today. I'm just going to post the topic here. Armie Hammer. What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Bear with me for a second. And what's going on? How's everybody doing? Thanks for joining. We've got an interesting conversation today. But before we get started, I need to thank Jamie Foxx, the actor Jamie Foxx, for coming up with this brilliant set of specs here. These blue light blockers. Jamie, you're a brilliant designer, smart guy. Privé Revaux, that's his brand of blue light blocking glasses. So I thought I'd try them out. I liked them so much that I bought two pairs. This is one pair. You guys can tell me what you think. They seem to be working pretty well, though, I have to say. You know, definitely eyes feel more relaxed if you're a lawyer or in any profession where you're staring at a screen. You know, we read a lot as lawyers. I definitely recommend that you have a pair of these guys. And I like these because they're super fashionable. I mean, look at how cool they look. They're very light. They come in a nice case, right, with a nice microfiber. Super cool. Again, Jamie Foxx, smart man, brilliant designer, great at branding. I personally like them. They work pretty well. And we'll see. This particular one sits on your nose bridge, unlike other designs that he has, but I like them. They're definitely make working on a computer all day much easier. And if you are like me and you are working remotely and you're on your computer constantly, definitely makes things a little easier. Anyhow, so today wanted to talk to you guys about something that just has crossed social media that is absolutely crazy and interesting, controversial and mind-blowing, and it is true to the phrase can of worms. And the phrase opening a can of worms is really interesting if you think about the analogy. Imagine earthworms just coming out of a container, right? You open this container and earthworms are everywhere. Slimy, gross, difficult to look at, definitely hard to get back in the can. You don't really want to touch it. Oozing out, it's kind of gnarly, right? Well, that's sort of what comes to mind with this topic. So here we go. Let's jump right in. Armie Hammer. We've blogged about this and written some social media content about, done some video content about Armie Hammer. Basically, he's an actor, 6'5", handsome guy, successful actor in Hollywood, who is now just stymied. His career is completely stymied by these allegations of rape and very salacious, gross even, BDSM sorts of stuff. Kink, you know, sexual fantasies being lived out, and apparently, we'll go through the timeline very briefly, but his wife of 10 years divorced him somewhere in the mix of these allegations surfacing. And allegedly it was because he accidentally texted his wife a text that was supposed to go to one of his BDSM partners. And you can imagine his wife's reaction to that. That's the allegation. Don't know if it's true. And also, I think today we're going to be covering some of the more interesting legal aspects of this. I could care less about the gossip side of things. I think it's the legal side of things that are really interesting in light of the fact that the LAPD is now investigating him for allegations of rape by a new person who is known as Effie, and we'll talk about this in more detail. But interesting text messages have arisen, and like I always say, if it's in writing, it's hard to disprove. The text messages are very salacious. The text messages say a lot about who he is and what his fantasies are and the allegations. But right now, the question with Armie Hammer and the gals that are making these accusations against him is whether these affairs and BDSM kink escapades were done with consent. And if they were, then it's not considered rape, although it might be weird. Query a guy named Armie Hammer. I mean, what do you think he's going to be like? Roses and chocolates? I mean, sorry, I just had to joke about that. Anyway, so let's just talk about at a very high level. I mean, BDSM is one of these things. I, first of all, had no idea that this is as cottage of an industry, and more specifically kink and these most normal people would call abuse in these kinds of sexual interactions. And so, believe it or not, I went to Yelp and just searched BDSM dungeon. And this is mind-blowing. But there are like 10 BDSM dungeons in the LA area. And you heard it correctly, dungeons. I'm staring at these results, and they all have ratings and reviews of 3.5 to 5 stars. And they are straight fetish dungeons where people can put on outfits. They get what looks to be like a weapon, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, wow, my mind is blown right now. So if you didn't know this stuff existed, welcome to Hollywood, LA world. I guess things are weirder than us normal people would have ever thought. So anyway, apparently this is the thing. It is not specific to Armie Hammer. He's just the guy who's getting busted now because it's public information that he is a BDSM kink person and loves to engage in these things. And as a result, he is sort of getting, pistol whipped, if you will. And of course, there's the allegations of rape, and they were made by, during a time when he was married, which is just compounding the issue. And just to be perfectly square, allegations of rape are always very serious. You always have to investigate them. Particularly as a lawyer, I don't think anyone would ever take the position that allegations of rape should be made lightly, nor should they be taken lightly. So let's just get that out of the way. But what's the kind of timeline here? I mean, there's an evolution that's, 9 months long or 9 months short with this guy. And it starts in July of 2020 when his wife of 10 years, Elizabeth Chambers, basically files for divorce. They've got 2 young kids. But, the allegations we later learned, more recently, were that his wife received a text message from from him, that was intended to go to one of his BDSM partners. That's the allegation. I haven't seen any divorce papers where his wife actually makes the statement. Elizabeth Chambers actually makes a statement. I have seen her say that she is concerned for victims. And that sort of adds another flare of interest to this. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Hopefully you find this interesting. Hello. Hey, Daryl. So anyway, back to the conversation. January 11th, 2021, Armie Hammer's name starts trending on social media after an account called House of Effie, EFFIE. It's a social media account. There was Instagram. I think there's Twitter as well. Started sharing these graphic messages allegedly sent by Armie Hammer to various women. And the text messages were sent sometime between 2016 to 2020 when he was clearly married. Daryl, the topic is pinned. We're talking about the actor Armie Hammer and the BDSM and rape allegations made against him. We're just talking through the outline. So in one of these messages that surfaces in social media just a couple of months ago, Armie Hammer described himself, and I've seen the text messages, if it's the actual text message, unless it's a spoof, which says, I'm 100% cannibal, 100% a cannibal. And he tells women that I want to eat you. Query what he's talking about. Nevertheless, that's what surfaces on social media through this anonymous House of Effie account. And then immediately it's just an avalanche, one thing after another for Armie Hammer. He drops out of filming a romantic comedy that was called The Shotgun Wedding. Supposed to star with Jennifer Lopez. Instead, Josh Duhamel, actor, takes his place. And it's really just downhill from there. At one point in January of this year, he starts responding that, he didn't want to respond to these, what he calls BS claims But in light of these vicious and spurious online attacks, according to him, he can't kind of leave his children in this environment, and he claims that he voluntarily withdrew from the filming of this movie, and that the production company was supportive of his decision. Couldn't have picked something easier on a Sunday. I know. What can I say? You know what? In the wonderful world of internet law, things are just gnarly, and there's an interesting legal spin to this, and I wanted to cover it, and I thought it was an interesting conversation. Sorry, guys. Anyway, a friend of Armie Hammer's estranged wife basically goes to the blog or celebrity news site dailymail.com. I don't know if it's celebrity news or it's all different kind of news. But basically saying that, she was, Elizabeth Chambers is shocked by these allegations, and that, she wasn't aware that he had this side of him, and that he seems to be the polar opposite of what most people thought he was, which is a clean-cut, simpleton. I wonder if any Hollywood actor is a clean-cut actor or actress is a clean-cut simpleton, but nevertheless. And that is when things just go really awry when it comes to social media. A secret social media account is then unearthed, allegedly belonging to Armie Hammer. And it includes a video of a woman that he calls Miss Cayman, and he later says it's not Miss Cayman as in the beauty pageant Miss Cayman, but it is a woman who's scantily clad in lingerie. And again, this is, I don't know when this picture was taken, but it was unearthed in January of this year, after his wife files for divorce. Then in January of 2021, January 29th, I should say, he drops out of the drama series The Offer. Again, whether it's them dropping him or him dropping out, not really clear. But then the LAPD starts investigating him in February of this year. And that's where it gets interesting. They're investigating allegations by a woman named Effie. And the LAPD basically opens a sexual assault investigation. And this is where, in order to refute the allegations, Armie Hammer produces some very, very interesting text messages. Is it a civil lawsuit case or criminal? It's strictly criminal right now. To answer your question, Daryl, it's strictly criminal as far as I know. There are not any civil lawsuits, although there might be some brewing. In this particular instance with this alleged victim, Effie, it's purely criminal, and that's what sparked the LAPD's investigation. But she produced, or her lawyer produced, and she hired Miss Elrod, who's a famous, well-known women's, activist, represents victims of assault and makes, basically a big part of her practice is to represent victims of sexual assault, particularly in the Hollywood world. What procedure now going on with divorce after criminal allegations? Yeah, good question. I don't know if their divorce is complete or if it's still going. His ex-wife has been kind of quiet about it, as far as I can tell. But anyway, back to sort of our timeline. Armie Hammer is then kind of releasing these text messages between himself and one of the alleged victims, a woman by the name of Effie. And, the text messages, I'll let you guys read them in full, but they're very, very bizarre. Just to put the timeline correctly here, the woman comes forward saying that she was raped in a 4-hour ordeal, and that Armie Hammer was extremely abusive. She says that he violently raped me for over 4 hours in Los Angeles, adding that he slammed my head against a wall, bruising my face, and other acts of violence against me, to which I did not consent. And she says that was on April 24th, 2017. Okay, so then how do you explain a 2020 text message between the same gal and Armie Hammer, wherein she says these very, very sexual things of what she wants him to do to her? This is 3 years after the fact. And these are actually, again, unless these text messages are spoofed, my understanding is, they're produced from WhatsApp, and nobody's contesting the validity of the messages, meaning the evidence has foundation. They've been produced to the LAPD. But this particular message was produced by Armie Hammer to refute Effie's allegations of rape. Okay? So Effie allegedly says, helplessly horny, and I just need to tell you, because it's been so long since last time, I've been expletive, more so hard and screaming my legs, going to be expletive in ballet in the AM, and I'm dying to send you pics of the blood and audio recordings and to hear you breathing in my ear, blah, blah, blah. I know you're probably feeling vulnerable or fragile right now and going through a lot, and I know all that, so I'm sorry. I just don't care. I'm way too expletive, needing to be utilized, and, you using me as property and choke me to pass out. I'm sorry if this makes you feel anxiety, blah, blah, blah. And his response, again, this is in 2020, 3 years after the alleged rape, okay? His response, which he produced to rebut the criminal allegations of rape, he states, it doesn't give me anxiety, but I'm not going to be able to engage you in that specific way right now. It never ends well. We can talk and be friends, but I can't do that. This is where things get really, really interesting, and I have to question this text message. And again, I don't think the victim is even questioning the authenticity at this point. It is yet to be seen how this plays out in criminal court. It is crazy. I agree with you. And again, he didn't produce this until the allegations against him were made. And he made a comment that, look, I'm sorry to reveal this private discussion, but unfortunately I have to rebut myself, the allegations now that this has gone into a criminal, potentially civil investigation. So, as if she were the only one, she's not. And, she kind of talks about all of in great detail, all the different things that Armie Hammer allegedly did to her. Again, she says it's a violent rape that lasted over 4 hours in Los Angeles, and that he beat her feet with a crop so that they would hurt every time she took a step, that she tried to get away, but that he wouldn't leave her. And she claims that she thought she was going to be killed by him that time, and that he left her with no concern for well-being, that she was completely shocked. And she makes a video of this, right? And she's reading her statement. Effie's, again, query this message that we see 3 years after this alleged incident where, again, if it's authentic, she claims that, she's asking for more. I hate to say it that way, but that's sort of what it looks like if the text message in WhatsApp is true. Armie's lawyer essentially released a statement refuting this. And he says, look, her own correspondence with Mr. Hammer refutes her allegations with graphic text messages. Apparently there are more than that. There are numerous text messages after the alleged incident in 2017 where she's engaging in these sexual campaign, trying to get his attention again. And according to Armie's lawyer, Armie says it was never his intention to embarrass or expose Effie's fetishes or kinky sexual desires, but she now has escalated this matter into another level by hiring a civil lawyer to host a public press conference. With the truth on his side, Mr. Hammer welcomes the opportunity to set the record straight. And Mr. Hammer has maintained that all of his interactions with Effie and every other sexual partner of his, for that matter, have been completely consensual, discussed in advance, and mutually agreed upon. And he says, the lawyer says, Effie's attention-seeking and ill-advised legal bid will only make it more difficult for real victims of sexual violence to get the justice they deserve. Well, there are more allegations against Armie Hammer. In a Instagram screenshot that was produced by Paige Lorenz, an Instagram model, and probably, I don't know what else she models, but she also produced some Instagram direct messages from an account, which again purports to be Armie Hammer's blue checkmark verified account. What was the question? Is there a historic precedence for something so heinous and yet so public? Great question. I'm not sure. This is the first time I'm hearing about something so heinous and so public. I mean, look, this guy's talking about cooking and eating his sexual partners. And this is where it gets really super crazy. And again, can of worms is an understatement. But basically, there's a Instagram message, direct message that's released, allegedly, from Armie Hammer to this model, Paige Lorenz, wherein Armie Hammer says, "You just live to obey and be my slave. I will own you. That's my soul, my brain, my spirit, my body. Would you come and be my property till you die?" And if that wasn't weird enough, if I wanted to cut off one of your toes and keep it with me in my pocket so I always had a piece of you in my possession, ? Wow. I don't know if you guys remember this, but back in the day, people used to carry those cut off toes of a rabbit's foot, or at least that's what it looked like on a keychain. This, cutting off your sexual partner's toe and carrying it in your pocket, is at another level. Again, if this is true, that is crazy bizarre. Did he mean it literally, or was this some talking out fetish fantasy? I don't know. But apparently she also produced images of an A, the letter A, that Armie Hammer carved into her lower abdominal area near her body parts, lady parts, if you will. And she produced the image, and the image was produced by Daily Mail. And it, in fact, is a letter A, which she says was carved into her body with a knife. And he asked her if he could do it as to fulfill a sexual fantasy. And she, before she could consent to it, according to her, it was too late and he had already carved it into her body. And again, pictures of this have been produced, and it is not fun to look at. Armie Hammer also had to, produce additional messages to sort of rebut this. And somewhere he says, "I had kidnapped her and I was explaining to her that I kidnapped her because I knew she wanted it, and then she would explain how I was going to keep her and use her as long as I wanted. That's called consensual non-consent." Make of that what you will. I think the big picture here is Armie Hammer is not claiming that he is not a BDSM kink fetish follower, meaning that this is something that he does do. He's refuting the allegation of a non-consensual encounter, and he's refuting the allegation of rape vehemently. And there are, again, the LAPD's investigating this. Another message, House of Effie. Remember, we said this is a Instagram account that people believe was actually created by Effie herself. And somebody, a follower of hers, sends her a message, basically asking if she's okay. Does he have any redeeming qualities? And the person says, "I'm sorry. I hope he's held accountable in some way. Have you got legal representation?" And allegedly, Effie replies in this DM, "Thank you. I'm not saying he raped me. No need for legal rep." Anonymous person responds, "Oh, good. Thanks for sharing that. I'm relieved to hear it. He's just a total, a-hole and a liar, right? Still ugly behavior." And her response on January 21st, 2021 is, "I didn't say anywhere it was not consensual, so I'm not sure why so many messages about it." Again, an account claiming to be Effie's is saying this. Here's a question. So would you defend that case? Defend it from what standpoint? I don't do criminal work. I wouldn't defend the criminal stuff. But maybe the defamation claim. I mean, I would represent Armie Hammer if, again, this was a false accusation of rape. I would do it. I would probably do it. Because, again, accusing somebody of rape falsely is one of the worst things that you can accuse somebody of. It's defamation per se. The guy's been dropped from shows, from roles. Certainly had an impact on his personal life. On the flip side, too, he also, it seems, based on the timeline of these messages, that he was cheating on his wife and engaging in BDSM and kink. And without addressing the merits of that sexual lifestyle, if that's what you do, and people who are in that lifestyle, it is a lifestyle apparently, like I said earlier in the conversation, there's about 10 of these dungeons in LA that you can join or participate in. But without addressing the merits of this lifestyle, I would simply say to be accused of raping somebody, multiple victims, is one of the most heinous accusations in my book that you could be accused of. But now comes the interesting legal sort of questions. My first question, if Armie Hammer was sitting across the table from me, is this. People don't even understand, per se, defamation. Yeah, I agree. Here's the question I'm asking, Armie Hammer. You are a A-list Hollywood celebrity, big-time actor. If you were going to engage in these acts, notwithstanding the fact that you're married, why didn't you have a non-disclosure agreement with these people? Now, what I understand from the whole BDSM and kink community is that it is a private thing, meaning nobody advertises publicly with their identity openly that this is what they do and this is their lifestyle because it's so controversial and questionable. So again, you've got the money. Did you not think to sign an NDA, have the participants execute an NDA so that they can't talk about these escapades? I don't know. Again, I'm not getting into whether that protects him from an allegation of rape. I don't think it should. But in terms of this lifestyle and the things that are being said about him wanting to cook, he allegedly asked this Instagram model if he could cut her rib and cook it and eat it. That's disgusting. That's disgusting stuff. Again, this stuff is all new to me, so I have no idea how much people follow this stuff and actually are interested in this stuff. But unbelievable stuff. Cutting off this model's toe and keeping it with him. I mean, these are things that are in writing, which is even more bizarre. It's not things said in a bedroom where nobody can follow. It's in writing. It's in a text message. So that's the first question I would ask Armie is, did you not consider having an NDA to protect yourself from the production of these things, discussion of these things in the public domain? Again, notwithstanding the rape allegations, which I think would supersede any sort of NDA because it's criminal conduct. Here's the interesting things, that legal question that's raised. Consent. Can you consent to these acts of being beaten with the paddle, right? If you look at the images of this model that Armie Hammer was dating, who admits that he was seeing and that he was having these, what he says, consensual acts with, she's bruised. She's bruised. She was tied up, she says, the whole 9 yards, right? Real nasty stuff. Biting, and at one point one of the models claims that he bit her so hard that it broke skin or was about to break skin and left bite marks. So here's the interesting legal question. The interesting legal question is, can you actually consent to this? Can you consent to this deep BDSM kink behavior? And I think it's an interesting legal question because in most jurisdictions, right, what you learn as a lawyer, even in law school, is you can't consent to an assault. And the question is this assault? And, the laws have not caught up, right? So there's no federal statute on this. This is all state law. Or municipal rules. And there's over 3,000 municipalities in America. And obviously, every state can have its own rules when it comes to what is a consensual sexual encounter. And there are many, many problems for people like Armie who do not deny being involved in this sort of lifestyle. And the number one problem is consent. How do you obtain consent to engage in these acts? Query that. When you look at the statutory framework across the United States, it's almost impossible to find a state that has on this book some sort of consent to what is in fact an assault. And so let's look at some of these rules, right? Let's look at some of these rules. And it's interesting to make an analogy to sports, right? Because in sports, you can consent to an assault, right? But that's specific to, an athletic, professional athletes engaging in a sport versus a sexual encounter. And so the narrow question is, again, in BDSM and kink, can you consent to sexual contact that is that is essentially out, if it was outside of the sexual context, would be assault, like biting somebody or hitting somebody, etc. Whatever these people do to each other. And the number one problem, like in Arizona, right? In Arizona, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing any physical injury to another person, that is simple assault. Or intentionally placing another person in reasonable apprehension of imminent or physical injury, that is also assault. Knowingly touching another person with the intent to injure, insult, or provoke such person. And there is no exception for consent. So if you consented, the victim consented to these things, there is no exception under Arizona law that we can see. And the aggravated assault statute in Arizona would actually increase the severity for people who do this. And listen to this definition carefully. A person who commits the assault while the victim is bound or otherwise physically restrained, or while the victim's capacity to resist is substantially impaired. And so from what I'm reading about Armie Hammer and the BDSM lifestyle, if you will, being bound appears to be a normal course of dealing, if I could say it that way. And so isn't that, it's 100% being restrained. So under Arizona law, that is an aggravated assault. If you engage in some sexual encounter where the person is bound, even if it was consensually bound, that's the context. Or the victim's capacity to resist is substantially impaired. What does that mean? To have a substantially impaired capacity to resist in a sexual encounter that is supposed to be consensual. You know, this is not somebody roofing your drink. Remember, let's put some context. This is somebody who consents to a sexual encounter, who's in the BDSM lifestyle or kink lifestyle, and specifically says, we're going to do these things, and they act out those things. And the question is, when the person, the victim or participant, comes back later and says, you know what, I was assaulted. This is sexual assault. This is rape. I never really consented to this, and it was scary. There's a quandary here, right? There's a quandary. In New York, it's even more interesting. So in New York specifically, the statute reads, absence, so there is no consent, certainly if the victim is underage, let's understand that, is mentally disabled or mentally incapacitated or physically helpless. So again, if you're tied or if you're gagged, it would 100% fall within the New York statute for aggravated assault, New York statute for aggravated assault, and rape in the third degree, according to New York law, you know, consent requirement is a little more qualitative, but still grossly undefined, right? So guilt is assumed under New York law when, quote, lack of consent is by reason of some factor other than incapacity to consent. Let's read that again. Guilt is assumed for a rape charge in the third degree when lack of consent is by reason of some factor other than incapacity to consent. So that's talking about mental incapacity. So if you are mentally incapacitated, you are drunk or you are on some sort of mind-altering substance, you can't consent, that's different. The statute still makes this rape in the third degree if you are, again, if you're bound, if you're gagged, or you're in some position where you can't, other than for incapacity to consent, you can't consent physically. Problematic. California, which is where obviously Armie Hammer is being investigated by the LAPD for rape, has a more robust definition of consent, interestingly enough, which means it has more hoops you have to jump through to get a consensual encounter, sexual encounter. Consent shall be defined to mean positive cooperation. Again, a problem if you're in the BDSM kink world. Positive cooperation in act or attitude pursuant to an exercise of free will. Let's listen to that again. Consent shall be defined to mean a positive cooperation in act. So you physically act to consent. You walk into the door. You lock the door behind you. You do whatever you do, preparatory acts, right? In act or attitude, pursuant to an exercise of free will. So again, if your free will is taken from you, can you consent? If that's part of the act where, hey, you're going to kidnap me, Again, I find this stuff to be totally bizarre. But if you're going to kidnap me and we're going to do this role play thing, is that an exercise of free will at that point? Have you revoked is your free will revoked at that point? I think it is. The other part, the second half of California's consent statute says the person must act freely and voluntarily. Freely and voluntarily. That to me tells me at any given time you should be able to get up and walk away. Literally get up and walk away on 2 feet. Not have to crawl or cut some rope off your hands or whatever. The person must act freely and voluntarily and have knowledge of the nature of the act or transaction involved. Knowledge of the nature of the act. So when we look at Armie Hammer and these allegations, right, these women are saying, like one of them, he cut the letter A into my body with a knife, and she shows the letter A a few inches from her, in her lower torso area, basically. Must have been extremely painful. The question is, can you consent to that? Can you consent to that? She claims she didn't. Really interesting questions here. Again, this is kind of a weird topic, but I think it is very, very, very interesting from a legal standpoint. It is yet to be seen how this investigation concludes. Haven't read a lot of attorneys doing a legal analysis on this, and so if you have an opinion on this, whether you're an attorney or not, I'd love to hear it. Again, I don't want to take away from the allegation of rape, which is a very serious allegation, has to be investigated in my personal opinion. But on the flip side, if you voluntarily, and clearly some of these victims have at one point volunteered to engage in some of these acts, the question is there rape here? And the law, fortunately or unfortunately, if you were Armie Hammer, does not favor this lifestyle, the BDSM lifestyle. It does not favor being in this role play, being tied up and engaging in things that are questionable, that most normal people, if I can say that, I'm sorry if I'm calling you, abnormal if you engage in this stuff. That's my personal opinion. It makes it very difficult. But apparently this is an entire lifestyle. I mean, if you just search, again, like I did, in the greater LA area, there's over 9 dungeons that have Yelp reviews. Hope you guys thought this topic was interesting. Curious to hear your comments. Once again, shout out to Jamie Foxx for these amazing blue blockers. I feel really light wearing them. Great design. Love them. Privé Revo. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. That's the brand that I'm wearing. Anyway, interesting. Can't wait to see how the story unfolds. Hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. We'll continue to kind of update this topic as it goes. And if the LAPD decides to actually press charges, arrest him, and prosecute, it'll be even more interesting to see how his attorney alleges as a defense that there was consent. Again, the text messages only tell part of the story. I mean, they do demonstrate that somebody was willing to engage in these acts. But then the question arises, at the time the acts were taking place, if the person was, again, as we read in California statute, expressed acted freely and voluntarily with full knowledge and consent to the act. Yet to be seen. Interesting stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Till next time.